If you've been online recently, you've seen people talk about Stellar Blade. It's a new game from Korean developer Shift Up. It blends sci-fi aesthetics straight out of a Shiro Masamune manga with the gameplay of Sekiro or Devil May Cry. By all accounts, it looks pretty fun, stylish. They had to scratch that cyberpunk sci-fi itch I personally have been feeling for quite some time, or at least I would say that if it were coming out to PC. It's a PS5 exclusive, so I can't exactly play it. But the game looks great for those who have a PS5, especially considering the market's been starved for PS5 exclusives as of late, especially original IP. Okay, now look. Stellar Blade is a PS5 exclusive. So, as a PC gamer, I didn't really put much thought into it. It's kind of, it came, I was like, okay, it's cool. And then I moved on with my life. I didn't put much thought or focus into it beyond noticing the character model, as you do, and how it made me nostalgic for Ghost in the Shell and Bubblegum Crisis, old 80s and 90s anime and manga that I had grown up with. So I had no idea that people were positioning this game as the newest chapter of some larger culture war. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into when I started looking into it. If you've seen any discussion about Stellar Blade, you've seen people either talking about the protagonist Eve's bodacious character design or the supposed backlash to said character design. But the conversation surrounding this game has become so intense that even just acknowledging it will send a horde of angry gamers to your door to complain about whatever you just said. I mean, I'm sure this video alone will get like a lovely response, but I digress.
You are made of stupid.
To gauge the waters in this game, I casually asked on Twitter, hey, so what's the gameplay like for this game? I didn't say anything negative, it was just a casual question. And some people were helpful enough to draw comparisons to games that I played to illustrate what kind of game it was. A large number of people said, well, there's a demo. Which, yeah, helpful, a PS5 exclusive demo. I'm sure I, the PC gamer, would be able to download that right up and get right on that. But a surprising number of responses seemed to either be frustration, just sick of hearing about this game on their feeds, or absolute rage that I apparently was trying to badmouth this game. Clearly, I was badmouthing the game by just asking, what's the game like? So this game's a minefield, and I wanted to dig in a little deeper as to why, because this completely blindsided me. I didn't know what this game really was about, and all of a sudden people are getting really intense about it. So what's the deal here? Now, from my understanding, this game has become a topic of discussion for some time, unbeknownst to me again, as I mentioned up top. Now, gameplay-wise, I don't think it looked particularly special. It looked interesting, it looked fun, but it wasn't anything I hadn't seen before. Most of the controversy boiled down purely to character design. More specifically, the protagonist Eve's character design. Which, yeah, let's be fair. Let's get this out of the way right now. The character is sexy. It's a very sexy design. It's a very attractive design, a very alluring design. And it's very designed to get a primarily straight male audience excited.
When I play a game, I would like to see someone who is better looking than myself. That's what I want. I don't want to see something normal. I want to see something more ideal. I think that is very important in a form of entertainment. This is, after all, entertainment targeted for adults. And as for what Kim considers to be an ideal design, he states, someone that can show their own charms and attractiveness without damaging the narrative or the setting of the game.
And you know what? Cool. That's fine. Who cares, right? It doesn't matter. Yeah, some games are going to have that kind of focus. Others won't. And you're going to target your niche audience, and that's what you're going to get. In an interview, the lead designer indicated that one of their goals was to position the camera so that Eve's rear was center frame.
When it comes to the design, we put special attention on the back of the character, because the player is always facing the back of the character when they're playing. That's what they see the most of, so we thought this was pretty important. The article also says, Kim argues, however, that the studio's style is about more than pure titillation. The deliberately glamorous design of characters like Eve has become somewhat of a brave thing to be going for or attempting.
And you know what? I'm glad he admitted it. It's good. I'd rather someone be upfront about how shameless they are than try to hide it. Why hide it, you know? Be upfront. You want to market a game based on the character's attractiveness? Talk about that. That's great. I have nothing but respect for any developer who outright says what they're trying to do with their game. That's great.
Show me a boob, man, and I'll show you a no-brain, no-class knuckle-dragger who knows nothing of the fair sex. See if you're enlightened like I am. Then you know that the real show is down below.
And yeah, if you look at the gameplay, a lot of the sequences aim the camera right there. So clearly it's a priority. And that's fine. It's great. You know, whatever. Who cares, right? Well, apparently a lot of people care. Now, I don't understand the backlash in either direction, especially this early stage of my investigation on this game. Because from my perspective, if you want your game to be shameless or emphasize how hot your protagonist is, go for it. And that's fine. You might alienate some of your audience, but if that's the kind of game you want to make, cool. But I think it's odd, too, that this is being positioned as this revolutionary thing, that a character is sexy. And maybe it's because I'm a little older, right? So when I was growing up, we had Leisure Suit Larry, we had Dead or Alive, we had Mortal Kombat, you know, all these games that were very, very shameless. Lara Croft was put in Playboy magazine, I think, at one point. These are characters who were positioned as sexy. And, you know, that I never really thought that changed too much over the years. I think our perception as a culture have shifted to a more conservative view of overt sexuality, where people are hiding it more and more. It's a weird kind of trend I've noticed, but that's kind of but with games, it's kept pace with the general discussion in pop culture as a collective whole. I think gaming's gotten much better with sex. Back when I was a teenager, we had the hot coffee controversy with GTA, right? Where it got up to Congress where a game had a sex scene in it.
Representative that the Federal Trade Commission should investigate the publication of the video game Grand Theft Auto San Andreas to determine if the publisher intentionally deceived the Entertainment Software Ratings Board to avoid an adults-only rating.
Nowadays, you can have sex scenes in games all the time and no one bats an eye.
Distracted by my...
Game of the Year had tons of them. You know, Baldur's Gate 3, Game of the Year had tons of sex scenes in it.
I'm numbed to all the depravities I conduct on a daily basis, but boring sex? That's a new fetish entirely.
So I was under the impression that we're actually in a much better place with sexuality than ever before in gaming history. Maybe not the case with fan service on the front cover, but in terms of sex being explored as a concept, we're pretty good. From my perspective, I didn't think there was some controversy the fact that the character's thighs are center frame. That didn't seem to make sense to me. So I dug a little deeper. I knew there had to be more going on here. So this is my second time recording this because the first time I realized I did not have my mic on. That was a huge problem and got in the way of recording. So now we have the mic. We're good to go. In my pursuit to find the answers as to why Stellar Blade was so controversial, I decided to go through the list of articles I could find discussing Stellar Blade to figure out what controversy sparked everything. Now, there is one I'm going to discuss in the video properly that I will acknowledge in a bit, but for the most part, I want to see what the big controversy surrounding the game was. So we start with this article from Den of Geek that gives us an overview of everything. How Stellar Blade became 2024's most controversial game. This article is written by Matthew Bird, and this was done on February 16th, so pretty early in the controversy. They mentioned the gameplay footage that we were looking at. This odd story gained momentum a couple weeks ago when Stellar Blade's developers released a gameplay overview of the upcoming action title during the State of Play event. Though seemingly a pretty standard trailer, the reactions to that trailer made it clear that quite a few people became infatuated with the lead character's highly sexualized design. The article continues to say that people are leaving enthusiastic comments, as they put it, on the trailers for Stellar Blade. They go on to mention Bayonetta, Lollipop Chainsaw, Nier Automata, and Dead or Alive all having this kind of character design. So again, this is nothing new. This is pretty standard in gaming circles. As they point out, it's hardly unique to Stellar Blade. So this paragraph right here discusses Shift Up. And Shift Up's previous releases were all mobile games, like Goddess of Victory and Destiny Child. Not to be confused with the band Destiny's Child. While popular, these games developed a reputation in some circles for their sexy anime character designs and aggressive gacha microtransactions. Destiny's Child was actually censored in certain international markets as the original game featured some notably explicit artwork. So again, Shift Up is not unfamiliar to controversy. And I think censorship is a little more severe than having a nice-looking anime protagonist character. And again, they definitely don't shy away from their, that controversy, as we saw in the interview with Stellar Blade director Hyung Tae Kim.
Kim argues, however, that the studio's style is about more than pure titillation. The deliberately glamorous design of characters like Eve has become somewhat of a brave thing to be going for or attempting.
Again, this is talking more about the controversy surrounding Stellar Blade than any actual controversy itself. It's saying that certain players are being hyper enthusiastic, shall we say, about the character design. And then that's it. That's the big thing. Just people who are way too into the character design. And a history of not so great practices. Again, microtransactions are actually a really sleazy practice pulled by the AAA studios to milk you out of your money. The problem there has to do with the business model more than anything else. And I've never been a fan of microtransactions. I'm not a fan of gacha games. I think they want to exploit addictive behavior in order to get money out of people. And I think I don't like that. Nothing to do with Stellar Blade. It's just, well, who knows? Maybe there'll be massive microtransactions in the game itself. Who knows? This article mainly focuses on the controversy surrounding the game with fans, but they also bring up a story about a former employee of Shift Up who faced harassment at the company for their public support of feminist views. Now, again, that's behind-the-scenes controversy. I don't think most people in America are going to know about the controversy in a Korean game studio, but workplace harassment is never okay. That is very unethical, and frankly, that should be something more discussed than, say, whether or not Eve looks nice on camera. I think it's actually kind of stunning how this particular controversy has kind of been eclipsed by jiggle physics in Stellar Blade. Because a real person being harassed by a company, and again, hasn't been verified, hasn't been... Some of the information is no longer available to read according to this article, but I still think that's a bigger point of discussion than, say, whether or not Eve's body is center frame. I think that's a non-issue compared to real people being harassed. So I digress. This one quote from the article I think sums up my perspectives on this whole issue. The controversy over Stellar Blade, such as it is, more often seems to be fueled by those who see this game as a representation of bigger political and social ideas, and are supporting/criticizing it because of how they believe it fits into their broader beliefs. And the articles I found kind of all feed into that more or less. This one article from the Mary Sue, for example, the headline is, Stellar Blade's design isn't the problem, it's how creepy men are being about it. And the article goes over, when I first recorded this, I read through the whole article, but I can sum up for you right now. Most of it has to do with the reaction of men to female characters. Of course, men being creepy about female characters is nothing new. The hypersexualization of women in media, from TV to movies to video games, is a decades-old ongoing issue. However, it is especially a problem in video games, as it's estimated that 61% of those working in the gaming industry are male. Additionally, although it has been found that women now make up half of the gaming community, they are misconceptions that gamers are still predominantly male. Hence, from Lara Croft to Bayonetta, women in video games have consistently been heavily sexualized to appeal to men. I feel that's a little reductive. I think also women who like women definitely don't mind having attractive female characters, but I digress. Let's accept that argument. That has nothing to do with Stellar Blade. That has to do with the overall discussion surrounding Stellar Blade. That says the game itself isn't controversial. It says that the culture war in which you're responding to is controversial. But again, nothing really about the game inherently. It's being used as a discussion point in a broader context. And again, that is true for both sides. Here we have an article from comicsgate.org, a resource of so much intelligent discussion, I'm sure. Stellar Blade, woke activists enraged by video game with attractive female character! Exclamation point. Again, I haven't seen any cases where people are actually enraged by Stellar Blade. It's more the reaction to Stellar Blade I'm seeing a reaction to, but I digress. PlayStation's upcoming game, Stellar Blade, is generating both hype and backlash for its decision to have a highly attractive female as its title character. The female character is Eve, not Stellar Blade. The Stellar Blade is not the name of the character, but okay, let's see how this article continues. The character, Eve, is featured with many different obtainable costumes. Many of the outfits highlight her female figure with a prominently featured backside! Exclamation point. The decision to have a character with a highly sought-after body standard is a highly sought-after body standard. With a highly sought-after body... The grammar in this article, you have a highly sought-after body, not body standard. Body standard is a general... Okay, I digress. Throwback to the 90s and 2000s, where many body types were both realistic and unrealistic, but often a very appeal... This is a bad article. Like, not bad as in like I'm against it morally, bad as in poorly written. This move has been receiving a critical acclaim from gamers who have wanted to see a return to form in the industry. Critical acclaim implies it's critics who are acclaiming the game. But I thought you guys were against journalists. Critics are journalists. I think this article doesn't know what these words mean. Sexualized character were a major selling point in the video game industry to the point where it became part of the culture. Again, here's the problem. I'll save you time for this one. At no point in this article do they even mention Stellar Blade. Poorly written, and at no point discusses Stellar Blade as a game. It's all about the culture war surrounding the game. So both sides of this article, on both the Mary Sue and the Comicsgate site, are talking about the reaction around the game and not actually the game itself or any controversy pertaining to the game. However, I would be lying if I said they are not examples of people that did criticize the game and there was controversy surrounding it. A noteworthy example is with IGN France. IGN France said that the character model for Eve looked like a glorified doll made by someone who had never actually seen a woman. And as people were quick to point out, there is a female model for Eve. She is based on a real person's physique. They were motion captured. So criticisms of Eve saying that she looks like a soulless doll, that's an opinion, but to say that you've never seen a woman before with this design, that's a little I don't like that argument. That seems really, there's a lot of issues with it, especially in the case when there's an actual person the character design is based off of. But those are the big ones. Those are the big points of controversy. Though I would be lying if I didn't withhold one other example of controversy I think really became a lightning rod for the whole discussion. I think this one argument from one video review really became the thing that everyone focused on. But again, we'll get to that later in the video. The point I want to highlight with this video, and this little segment right here, is that most of the controversy has nothing to do with Stellar Blade as a game. Everything seems to be about the culture war surrounding Stellar Blade. Stellar Blade is entirely incidental in this discussion. It barely factors into its own controversy. And I think that's telling about the level of controversy we're discussing right here. This has nothing really to do with Stellar Blade. Stellar Blade as a game is a figurehead for both sides of this argument, though more vocally, I would say, the right-wing reaction, where they're acting like journalists and left-leaning people are furious and fuming at the game, when most barely seem to have any interest in discussing it. And that's a criticism of both left-leaning publications that responded to the game, but also that the game itself doesn't seem to be sparking all that much controversy inherently, but rather that there's a controversial discussion surrounding the game that the company seems to be exploiting in its interviews. And we'll get to that more later and why I think that's insidious. But for right now, rest assured, Stellar Blade is not the controversy. The conversation that started before Stellar Blade even was announced is the controversy. For whatever reason, a lot of people have been spreading the belief that big gaming is censoring sexuality because of some cultural bias in the West. And I respected their viewpoint enough to kind of look into it. Senran Kagura is a popular action series. It became extremely popular in the 2010s. It focuses on ninjas doing ninja things, running around, fighting, fun stuff. I played a couple of them with friends years ago, and I thought they were good, but the main appeal is the fan service. It's shameless, it's right in your face, that's the appeal. And you can buy all these games right now on Steam, unlike Stellar Blade, you console exclusive you. But I was surprised to learn that they hadn't made a game in this series in a while. So I did a little research and found a couple different answers to explain why Senran Kagura has been missing for so long. The first comes from an interview with then president of Honey Parade, Kenichiro Takaki, when he discussed Senran Kagura 7. He claimed the issue with the 7th game was that it would not pass Sony's recently tightened rulings on sexual content. The other explanation comes from what happened shortly after this interview. Takaki left Honey Parade. Technically, Senran Kagura 7 is on the list of projects they're working on currently, but it has just not seen any development since its initial announcement. Ironically, this mention that the games would be censored heavily does not seem to apply to the PlayStation versions of the games that already came out, nor does it apply to the PC ports of all the games. And it's questionable what else they're referring to when talking about these tightened sexual restrictions. Because again, case in point, Stellar Blade. Sony wants to market to a larger demographic, and Senran Kagura is so niche, it's just not worth their effort. Or at least, not worth the resources they can instead put into a game that will be more financially successful. And yeah, that makes sense, but it's disappointing. And I'm sure a lot of fans are upset that they're not making this game because they deemed it not suitable for a larger, wider audience. It is shameless fan service, but it's also fun, and games should be fun ultimately. So yeah, I get why people are disappointed by that, and that sucks. It really does. The problem with the gaming industry is that if a game doesn't appeal to the widest demographic possible, developers won't invest their money into said projects. Case in point, Darkstalkers. I'm a fan of Darkstalkers. It was a 90s fighting game from Capcom. Morgan Ainsland, if you've seen that character in the Marvel vs. Capcom games, that's where that comes from. They made 3 games and they stopped making because Capcom believed that audiences wouldn't buy this incredible fighting game. And they based their market research on this based on re-releases of the game, right? They'd re-release it on like Steam or PS3 store, whatever. And because A, Capcom didn't market the game very well, and B, people already had the game on their PS1s, they didn't buy the re-releases. So Capcom was like, oh, people don't want new Darkstalkers because they won't buy our repackaged old Darkstalkers. That's how these corporations think, all right? They think in these general terms with money and all that, and it's nonsense. It's completely ridiculous. There's a lot of other factors at play here. But that means no more Darkstalkers, which is terrible and bad. And so Senran Kagura being discontinued, basically put on a shelf because Sony thinks that, and the developers think that Western audiences won't buy it, that's not too unusual in gaming. It's just an unfortunate circumstances when you are working in a profit-driven industry and you have to make the most money all the time and more than last year. If they think there's a roadblock in the way, they will cut funding and reinvest their money into a more successful property. That is why we get so few new IPs on the PS5 store and why AAA gaming is the way it is right now. It's a profit-driven industry. The problem here isn't politics, it's capitalism. However, a lot of gamers seem to think that censorship is the issue. And undeniably, censorship happens. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. There is censorship out there. So I'm not going to be foolish enough to say no game is censored anymore. I'm not going to make that statement. It's untrue. But I feel like the term is thrown around very willy-nilly and without a lot of focus on how it's used properly. While folks with big platforms will argue that there's some woke agenda, quote unquote, keeping your erotic games down, I don't think that's the case. I think the reality is these games don't sell particularly well, or alternatively, not well enough for the bigwigs on top to continue funding it. So a game might sell millions of copies, but they might say, well, this other game is selling even more. So let's take the money we would spend on this lesser project that's about equal and put it into the bigger franchise. That's how their minds work. It's greed, not politics. I guarantee you that if a game with just tons and tons of just, like a hentai game became successful, you'd see all these big developers just reinvest all their money into hentai because that would be what makes them the most money. They chase money, they don't chase politics. And if you think otherwise, you're not living in the real world where money drives business organizations, drives decisions like this. The problem is if your game has a very niche audience, you are not going to get the money. Going back to Stellar Blade, this game is clearly shameless and being distributed by Sony, the same company that distributed Senran Kagura. This game feels in many ways like a calculated move. Its gameplay is inspired by other games. Its main character, Eve, bears much in common with Bayonetta and Tubi from Nier Automata. Stellar Blade follows the formula well, but that wouldn't be enough to get it on top of the PlayStation Store bestseller list. There needs to be controversy. Am I saying that this controversy is manufactured? Yes, I am actually. Now, this is where gamers come in handy for the corporations. Corporations understand that word of mouth can make or break a game. Think of how many games exist out there that have had terrible word of mouth campaigns that have destroyed all their prospects. Tons of games get bad backlash and they're gone. What they want is controversy, not backlash. Backlash is one thing, controversy is different. Backlash is when people are arguing at the company. Controversy is when people are arguing over the product, right? That's the key difference. And I've noticed some games that exist without controversy. People say the game, there's some games that come out where no one says anything controversial about it. It just comes out and sometimes it's a hit, but often it's forgotten because no one is talking about it up to its time of release, even if the game is incredible. Ico, for example, great classic game, not controversial. It only became popular to discuss once the follow-up game from that studio, Shadow of the Colossus, came out. And that game was fantastic, but Ico was kind of always in its shadow, kind of dragged along by Shadow of the Colossus' success. That is when people started really talking about it. But no controversy. Great game, no controversy, not great sales. That's a good example from 20 years ago. But you can find dozens of examples today of games no one talks about that are just excellent. Hidden gems, they call them now. Now, with Stellar Blade, I saw more people telling me the game was controversial than people actually arguing about the game itself. I saw reactions to a reaction, and I followed them to the first reaction. A couple game reviewers said Eve's face looked childlike. Yeah, that's it. A couple of dudes online said that her face looked childlike. And, well, I mean, that's just your opinion, man. And he's a gaming journalist. So, personally, and here's the thing. Full disclosure, I've written some journalistic stuff in the past, and let me tell you, their opinions mean nothing more than the average person's, right? They just have a platform, and that's it. Their opinion only matters as much as you give it value. Any person online has the same level of influence as a gaming journalist. The problem is you just give them the clout. We give them the clout. That's it. And look, I've reviewed games before for gaming outlets. Well, I've reviewed one game, and I didn't do it ever again because I didn't like the circumstances in which I had to review it. You're given the key about 2 or 3 days before the game comes out, and they expect you to have an opinion on it. If it's a long game, you need at least 40 hours to play that game, and you don't always have the time of day to play 40 hours in 2 days, right? You can't form a strong opinion about a game in such a short period of time. So I always found that a little messy. And, I always valued word of mouth over gaming journalist outlets, even when working in that industry. So I think word of mouth from the average person is far more valuable than what some game reviewer says. So personally, I didn't take it very seriously. One guy says one thing, that's his opinion. Who cares? You move on with your life. A lot of people cared. A lot of people cared, apparently. Does Eve have a childlike face? No. She's based off of a real person, a real model, as far as I understand it. Her face looks fine. I don't particularly think it's the greatest character design in the history of character design, but it's cool. It's good. It's fine. It gets the job done. I don't care about this person's opinion. So for me, this controversy is a non-issue. But the problem is people took this gaming journalist's opinion and acted like everyone else on his political side of the spectrum agreed with them, that they're all in unison, that we all are meeting in our secret underground lair and said, "Oh, Eve's childlike, that's bad." Like, I don't give a fuck, man. I really don't. I don't care. Like, who cares? It's not important to me. I ultimately don't care about gaming reviews from professional outlets. I care about word of mouth, as I just said. I don't think gaming journalists deserve to get harassed. That's not cool. But I do have issues with the structural institutions behind the relationship between gaming journalists and AAA companies. I think there's a lot of... that's another video for another day. Actually, let me know if you want to hear that. I can ramble on that for a while, but that's a whole other discussion. So this is why I don't understand why anyone cares all that much. Because the side that's angry vehemently doesn't like gaming journalists. So why would you care? And the side that they're appealing to didn't watch the video. So they don't care either. No one cares. It's not an important opinion. So this controversy is over nothing. No one gives a fuck. No one cares. So, except for people mad. They really care. And they think you care too. But a lot of people really seem to care about character design all of a sudden. You see that a lot. People complaining that women in games just don't look like real women anymore. They throw out a few examples. Abby from The Last of Us 2. Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn. And now, someone from the new Star Wars games? That's the big target now? Mary Jane Watson from Spider-Man 2? Every time the controversy amounts to, I don't find this character attractive, so therefore it sucks. And look, character design is subjective. You're allowed to like what you like and not like what you don't like. That's fine. The problem is when you make it models' problems, the actors' problems, when you send threats to the people making the game. That's not cool. Now, making it more complicated is that a lot of gamers turn this into an East versus West conflict, as if the West is preventing Japan and Korea and China from making erotic, sexy games, even though very clearly that is not the case. Sony is a Japanese company. If they're aiming for a more international audience, they're going to change their directives to appeal to the largest demographic possible because they want money. It has nothing to do really with censorship. It's all about capitalistic greed, cutting funding to projects they think of as lesser because of the profit margins. It's not the left, it's not the right, it's money. And do not take your eye off that ball, because the problem is and always has been greedy corporations wanting to make money. A lot of people are saying that the West is refusing to make sexy games, which just doesn't make sense considering that one of the most popular Western games from last year featured a frog alien lady, a buff devil lady, and a tentacle erotica scene, and people ate that up. There were tons of thirst on that. But apparently it's okay to have a game where someone can have fun times with a man who turns into a bear, but it's taboo to have traditionally attractive characters. Now, let's go back to that initial thread I made about Stellar Blade. Someone in that initial thread asked me if I could think of any recent games that featured multiple beautiful characters, multiple women specifically, who are shown to be sexy and powerful and look kick-ass and have appeared exclusively on a Sony console recently and are traditionally sexy. Not like... Apparently they cited Baldur's Gate 3 as not that, but whatever. I told him about the Final Fantasy VII Remake, the new one, that just came out recently. It came out like a week before this thread started. I'm thinking like, Tifa, Aerith, Yuffie. And they're like, oh, well, what about original IP then? In which case I told them, what original IP? PS5 doesn't get original IP. What are you talking about? And I think that's the big issue, too. People are seeing their favorite franchises shift over the years to become more marketable, to become more accessible to the mainstream audience, and they're not seeing new things come out. And I think that's a big reason why Stellar Blade is kicking off as it is. It's a new franchise that appeals to that specific niche of gamer, and it doesn't seem to exist in the same traditional conservative sexual space that other older games that were more exploitative used to. And when I say conservative, I mean like the traditional conservative sexuality, where someone hides themselves, a little more, not as overtly erotic, that sort of thing. A lot of gamers seem to think developers are refusing traditional sexuality. I heard the term safe sexy thrown out a lot. And it took a while to figure out what they were talking about. They argued that Baldur's Gate 3 was safe sexy, while Stellar Blade wasn't, which, Stellar Blade seems as safe as humanly possible. Calculated, even. Whereas Baldur's Gate 3 features tons of queer characters, some unorthodox interspecies relationships, tentacles. It's really unsafe until I realized what they meant by saying, quote unquote, safe. And then I realized that this was a nonsense argument point. But after trying to piece together what this nonsense all meant, it became clear. Safe sexy is sex that's not mainstream. So when people say safe sexy, they mean not mainstream sexy, whereas unsafe sexy is mainstream vanilla stuff. It was at this point I realized that the people making this discussion were living in a fantasy world. This is not reality. You know, mainstream sexual stuff is mainstream. I'm sorry. Mainstream beauty is mainstream. Anything outside of that is ostracized by society in some ways, I think very unjustifiably, and it's bad. This is such a perpetually online argument, by the way. No, mainstream depictions of beauty, they're not avant-garde. They're not, it's standard. It's everywhere. Ironically, the conservative argument that we need to return to tradition is only happening because conservatives pushed back on sexy game design for years.
The Federal Trade Commission should investigate the publication of the video game Grand Theft Auto San Andreas to determine if the publisher intentionally deceived the Entertainment Software Ratings Board to avoid an adults-only rating.
And I mean, on a political level, in the government, there were meetings about the hot coffee mod when GTA came out. Your fight isn't with the gays or the women, it's with conservative politicians. It's with corporations that are working within confines by setting conservative ideologies into your games because they want to appeal to the biggest conservative audience.
In December was 123 million accounts.
Besides, it's not like you don't see sexy characters front and center in some of the biggest games of all time. I mean, have you seen GTA? Have you played Mortal Kombat? Even the more recent Mortal Kombat and GTA games still have very traditionally attractive characters front and center. Now look, ultimately, what I'm saying won't change anyone's minds. If you believe that the gaming universe is plotting against boobs, then, you believe this and you won't believe me. And I'm cool with that. I accept your dislikes. But I want to reach out to anyone who is using the evidence of your eyes and ears and living in reality to understand this is an echo chamber argument we're seeing here. It feels like I'm talking to people who no longer connect with existence. And don't tell me, oh, your side fought against sexy characters. It's look at feminist frequency and Anita Sarkeesian. To that, I'd say a lot of leftists don't like her either. They don't agree with her. Honestly, I think Anita Sarkeesian is more conservative than liberal. Because she believed that people have to fit into specific traditional boxes. Modern day feminism, fourth wave feminism, the LGBTQ philosophy discourse, a lot of that runs counter to what Anita Sarkeesian fought for, I should say, in her videos. She believed in traditional feminine nature, and she wanted it to be reinforced in gaming. A lot of modern feminists and queer folk don't agree with that. They fight against that, actually. She proposed modesty. We don't like that either. It's bizarre. It's a strange sort of disconnect that, yeah, she's a feminist, but she's not every feminist agrees in the same thing. Not every queer-friendly organization believes in the same things. There's a diverse body of thought. She didn't deserve to get harassed. She didn't deserve the backlash she received. But that doesn't mean I have to agree with what she says. In fact, I disagree a lot of the time. She didn't play a lot of the games, and you can tell based on her opinions on it. And you know what? That deserves criticism. It does not deserve her being harassed, though. You can criticize someone's argument without threatening them. That's just how it is. That's just being a normal person. The reactionaries and Anita Sarkeesian, they're the same. Just different arguments, but they're the same mentality. It must conform to this to be good. If it is outside my conformity, it is bad. That's how they think. And I don't believe that. I think just, the intention of the artist should be paramount. If you want to make a thing, be upfront about it, tell us what you want to make, and make it. That's what I think you should do. I think it's a reasonable belief. And, regardless of how extreme your game is, just have fun with it. Make it cool. Make it interesting. Make it dynamic. Make it stand out in some way. And I think Stellar Blade is doing that. I just don't like this bizarre positioning of it as like the last bastion against, the left or whatever. It's ridiculous. It's dumb. It's a game. Get over it. Play the fun game and have fun with it. It doesn't have to be the greatest. It doesn't have to be a war front to fight on. The problem is developers are averse to risk, not beauty. They also know that a subset of all gamers will complain if a character doesn't appeal to them entirely and directly. And they want to market off of that. Controversy sells. And if you think you're fighting the corporations by complaining like this, you are sadly mistaken. All you're doing is lining their pockets. They simply do not care if you're mad. They care if you're talking about them. If you see a game you don't like, be strategic. Don't play it. Don't engage with it. Don't post about it online. Don't make it trend. Make it forgotten. Make it fade into obscurity. If you really don't like a game, don't engage with it. But the gaming companies already have you pegged. They know you're not going to do that. They know you're going to complain. They know you're going to rage. And that is there by design. You are playing their game. Take a game like Forsaken, for example. Yes, early discussions were what you'd expect. It was woke, it was bad, whatever, writing bad, yeah. But when the game finally came out, people played it and realized the game wasn't bad because it was woke. It was bad because it wasn't very good. It was a bland, awkward, unremarkable game. The whole thing about game censoring that beauty, it's done to appeal to a larger audience. It's not really censorship. It's just it's based on market research. That's it. It's based on knowing demographics, seeing what people buy. That's it. There's no agenda beyond making money. There's no conspiracy. It's just they want your money. If you're upset the path mainstream games is taking, and put your money in the hands of indie developers or smaller teams outside the AAA system. Or, mod the games when they come out.
I like her. She looks like she could throw me over her shoulder and carry me to safety, should the need arise.